The congregation shivered in the cold. Notre Dame echoed with the sounds of 400 musicians and singers. The young man, born on the island of Corsica, moved impatiently forward. Napoleon Bonaparte, 35 years old, was about to be crowned Emperor of France. "I found the crown of France in the gutter," he said, "and I picked it up." It was December 2nd, 1804. Within 3 years, Napoleon's conquest would extend his empire across almost all of Europe, and he would rule over 70 million people. Not since the ancient Caesars had one man held so much power.
Napoleon changed the world. Here is a man who rises not on the basis of his blood, not on the basis of his background, but on the basis of his ability. No one else has appeared like him, has dominated the world like he has.
Qu'est-ce que Napoléon?
What is Napoleon?
C'est une main.
It's a hand in a shirt.
C'est un
It's a strange hat.
C'est bizarre. Si vous mettez ce
If you show the
chapeau,
hat,
si
if you
vous
show the
mettez
hand in the shirt, in Japan, the United States, or France, everybody will say Napoleon.
Napoléon.
He was above all ambitious. He loved power. He said, "I love power," like a musician loves his music.
In the spring of 1769, Letizia and Carlo Bonaparte were crossing the mountains that straddled the interior of the island of Corsica. They were Corsican patriots, determined to repel a French army that had invaded their tiny island nation.
The Corsicans were only about 100 to 120,000 people of peasant or shepherd origin. They had very few firearms, very little gunpowder, and that was all. They had to defend themselves against the 22 million population of France, then the most advanced country in Europe.
The Corsicans never stood a chance. After a year of fighting, leaving thousands dead and wounded, they were defeated, and Letizia and Carlo were going home. Letizia was 6 months pregnant. That summer, Letizia was celebrating the Feast of the Assumption when she felt her first labor pains. Later that day, August 15th, 1769, she gave birth to a son, Napoleone Bonaparte. Born just after the bitter French conquest, Napoleon would spend his childhood hating France, the nation he would one day rule. "I was born when Corsica was perishing," Napoleon later wrote. 30,000 Frenchmen spewed onto our shores, drowning the throne of liberty in waves of blood. The cries of the dying, the groans of the oppressed, and tears of despair surrounded my cradle from the hour of my birth. Corsica was now a French colony. Suspended in the Mediterranean between France and Italy, for centuries Corsicans had fiercely resisted invaders, Romans, Moors, Genoese. After the French victory, Corsican rebels fled to the mountains, where they continued to fight on. But Napoleon's father, Carlo, a 23-year-old university student, readily submitted. Soon he was wearing powdered wigs, embroidered waistcoats, and silver-buckled shoes. Napoleon never forgave him for betraying his Corsican heritage. He would later say harshly that his father was rather too fond of pleasure.
I think Napoleon always held a grudge against his father for having submitted. But poor Carlo, he knew he had lost the battle. He realized the French were there, so he had to live with them and make the best of it.
Carlo began practicing law, won election to the Corsican Assembly, and rose in the esteem of the French rulers. But Napoleon rarely had a good thing to say about him. He saved his praise for his mother. The beautiful, strong-willed Letizia. As a mother, he would say, she was without equal.
He was obsessed by her, fascinated by her, praised her enormously. She was very tough and determined little woman. 13 times pregnant, she had 8 surviving children. He says that all his success in life was due to the training she gave him.
La mère.
The mother. What a man, Napoleon said. She has the head of a man on the body of a woman.
Carlo and Letizia owned a house in the country as well as one in the city, a mark of their status. They were Corsican aristocrats, but they were not rich. With 8 children, they struggled just to get by on an island that had been impoverished for centuries. There was nothing, the ambitious couple believed, that Corsica could offer them or their children. Only one country could, the country that had vanquished their own. France was the envy of Europe. Great Britain, Austria, Prussia, Spain, none had more people or greater wealth. While America was just beginning its experiment with democracy, Versailles gave testimony to the power of kings. Carlo was an awestruck provincial. Rumblings of discontent with King Louis XVI and aristocratic privilege were no concern of his. That Queen Marie Antoinette and a frivolous court were draining France of precious resources did nothing to diminish Carlo's delight in everything he saw. He dreamed that one day his children would become noblemen in that glittering citadel of power in which he had no place. For years, Carlo had nourished a plan. In Versailles, he saw it come true. He secured Napoleon a scholarship to a school in France. Napoleon set foot in France for the first time in the winter of 1778. A thin, sallow 9-year-old, accustomed to the warmth of the Mediterranean, suddenly alone on the windswept plains of northern France. A scholarship boy at the Royal Military College at Brienne-le-Château. He could hardly speak French. For the next 5 years, there would be no holidays, no visits home. He had no love of France. He still thought of himself as a grudging subject of an alien king.
Il se sent corse.
He thinks of himself as a Corsican. He is surrounded by students who are the children of French aristocrats, and they have nothing in common with this little foreigner.
Donc, lui, qui est un être fier,
And since he is quite proud, he becomes a loner.
il va s'isoler, il va se mettre à part.
Napoleon would one day turn his sympathies toward France, but not without years of resentment and struggle. He was 15 when he was promoted to the Royal Military Academy in Paris. Along with the sons of some of France's greatest families, he would learn the splendors of French civilization. The Royal Academy was as much a finishing school, turning officers into gentlemen, as a war college. We were magnificently fed and served, Bonaparte said, treated in every way like officers possessed of great wealth. The poor Corsican teenager still felt like an outsider. He had entered a world of opulence and luxury, but it only served to fuel his scorn for the privilege and snobbery of the French nobility. One teacher described him as quiet and solitary, frightfully egotistical, proud, ambitious, aspiring to everything. He would go far, his school report read, in favorable circumstances. He began his apprenticeship as a soldier when he was 16, a lowly second lieutenant, training with the best artillery unit in the French army. He grew expert at sighting a gun, handling rammer and shot, deploying men. One of the greatest careers in military history had begun.
He feels that the regime will not let him have the position he dreams of. The top positions are reserved for the noblemen, while Napoleon comes from minor nobility, poor people.
Frustrated in his military ambitions, Bonaparte dreamed of becoming famous as an author, wrote a brief history of Corsica, even tried his hand at a novel.
Il se sait, il se pense, il se croit.
He knows that he's capable of great things.
Appelé peut-être à un grand destin.
He feels that perhaps he's destined for greatness. But at that point, how can he possibly believe it?
Il s'ennuie à mourir.
He's bored to death.
Always alone among men, Bonaparte wrote, I come home to dream by myself, and to give myself over to all the forces of my melancholy. My thoughts dwell on death. What fury drives me to wish for my own destruction? No doubt because I see no place for myself in this world. It was the revolution that would set Bonaparte free, for it would end. As the revolution gained momentum, Bonaparte was serving in the army far from Paris. He distrusted the violent mobs, but welcomed the changes transforming the country.
He is certainly not a revolutionary before the beginning of the revolution. But Bonaparte welcomes the revolution as good news. It almost has a religious impact for him, because all of a sudden he feels that the revolution is going to open up French society.
Bonaparte was 23, an idealistic revolutionary, when he took leave of absence from the French army and returned to Corsica. The French Republic had made Corsica a part of France, and given Corsicans all the rights and liberties of French citizens. Bonaparte, a lieutenant in the island's National Guard, threw himself into Corsican politics. Pasquale Paoli was the island's governor. Paoli had been Bonaparte's childhood hero, the leader of the Corsican War against France. Now Bonaparte dreamed of rising to power, standing by Paoli's side. But he would be bitterly disappointed. Paoli did not trust him. A ragazzone inesperto, Paoli called him. A big, inexperienced boy. The Corsican patriot thought Bonaparte too ambitious, too self-centered, too sympathetic to France.
Bonaparte and Paoli are on totally different wavelengths. Paoli retains the idea that Corsica should be independent. By this time, Napoleon Bonaparte is perfectly comfortable with a Corsica that is part of revolutionary France.
Bonaparte soon became the leader of a faction opposed to Paoli. Clan rivalry ran deep on the island, intensifying the political struggle between the two men. Paoli's partisans and Bonaparte's were soon at war. In the end, Paoli proved too strong. Bonaparte's home was sacked and he was forced to flee to the mountains. The Corsican Assembly declared Bonaparte and his entire family traitors and enemies of the fatherland, condemned to perpetual execration and infamy. Bonaparte no longer had the right to live in Corsica. He had been given a death sentence by his own people. Torn by civil war, France was also at war with almost all of Europe. Austria, Spain, Prussia, and Great Britain were bent on destroying the new French Republic, while French radicals promised to help all peoples rise against their rulers. Reinstated in the army as an artillery captain, Bonaparte was ordered to Toulon, a city of 28,000 on the southern coast that had rebelled against the Republic, throwing its port open to the English. The British fleet defended the city from the harbor. 24-year-old Bonaparte thought he knew how to drive them out. He argued that if his soldiers could seize the heights commanding the harbor, they could bombard the fleet, drive it away, and the city would fall. It was a simple plan, but none of the generals would listen.
The generals in Toulon were total incompetence, or a little worse. Finally, a fairly competent general showed up, listened to Napoleon's plans, and said, naturally.
This would be Bonaparte's first great chance. With aristocratic officers fleeing the country, there was suddenly a vacuum, an opportunity for rapid promotion for soldiers who could prove themselves under fire. Toulon was recaptured and Bonaparte promoted. In just 3 months, he had risen from captain to brigadier general. The Republic continued to fight for its life, still clashing with enemies beyond its borders, still in turmoil at home. With France in chaos, threatened on all sides, Robespierre showed no mercy in his efforts to bring about unity and order. Liberty, he said, cannot be secured unless criminals lose their heads. Determined to make his voice heard, Bonaparte wrote a political tract in support of Robespierre. I can still picture him, one noblewoman remembered. He wore badly made dirty boots and a nasty round hat pulled down over his eyes. An overall sickly effect was created by this thinness and his yellow complexion. Bonaparte seemed to have come to a dead end. He was desperate for promotion, but no one paid any attention. If this continues, he wrote his brother, I shall end by not stepping aside when a carriage rushes past. Then political turmoil once again gave him his chance. On October 5th, 1795, crowds of Parisians stormed through the streets alongside National Guardsmen bent on restoring the monarchy. The rebellion threatened to topple the Republic. The government called on Bonaparte to repel the attack.
There wasn't much other choice, actually, when this rebellion broke. There aren't any competent generals in Paris. Here's young Bonaparte. He's a man of conviction. Put him in.
Napoleon was not one to pussyfoot around. He would use all his weapons. Nobody had really used cannon on the Paris mobs before. He was going to shoot. He waited till he could see the whites of their eyes.
The enemy attacked us, Bonaparte wrote his brother. We killed a great many of them. Now all is quiet. I could not be happier. 3 weeks later, he was made a full general, commander of the Army of the Interior. He was 26.